This is Talk is Sheep, a podcast by the Wild Sheep Society of British Columbia. Come along as we take conversations that matter to you into the high alpine.
Mr. Hamilton, how goes it?
Well, it ain't raining, so pretty happy about that. Ain't snowing.
Hey, spring's here. Sheep counts. Life is pretty good.
How'd the sheep counts go?
Well, dude, I think it was a bit sobering. So yeah, you reached out to me right away that morning with a picture of a dead ewe, right? And very high mortality rate in that Spence's Creek area. That highway there has sheep on it, and people are driving too fast. And there was a vehicle incident, and they hit that ewe, and so our volunteers showed up, and that's the first thing they seen.
Yeah.
There was some coyotes hanging around, so I think it was a little bit sobering, to be honest with you, from the sounds of things. And of course, our spirit's a little bit dampened already because of COVID. We can't have the big group. We kept it very quiet this year in terms of marketing it. We used previous volunteers.
Yeah.
And respectfully to our members, we reached out to local First Nations, we reached out to local community, and we had to be respectful. We couldn't show up with 250 people hanging around. It wasn't socially responsible. So this year was it's a peculiar year. It's been tough for all of us. COVID, dead ewes, predators. So we're doing what we can, right? We're managing the circumstances the best we can. And it's a challenge, right? So I don't know.
Oh, it is. It is. Yeah, when I got that picture sent to me, I'm just like, oh my God, because he said that ewe wasn't there an hour previous, so it was something that happened while they were there, and it just shows why we're in that area doing these counts, right? To kind of get some accountability on people, and maybe. Who knows what kind of mitigation we can put in to stop that in the future. But huge shout out to all our volunteers that were able to take part in this and do their part to give back. So looking forward to seeing the final counts.
And there will be more. There's going to be more opportunity. You'll hear on this next podcast, we have Chris Procter on, Regional Bio. He's a senior manager, senior biologist for Region 3. And there is going to be opportunity for more counts in the future for the Wild Sheep Society BC members. There's stuff around this Fraser River stuff we're doing. So there's going to be an opportunity to get out on the landscape. It's just this year with Spence's Creek, we couldn't do much. Our hands were kind of tied with COVID. And, again, we have to be respectful, do the right thing. And we had a small cohort of individuals on the landscape and doing the work there. So, yeah, it is what it is, right, buddy? So.
Exactly. It wasn't a party. It was work.
Mostly. Well stated. Yeah, for sure. So on that note, this is, actually, before we jump into the podcast, let's just jump into Act Now. You've been working hard managing that campaign.
Yeah.
We're seeing some good success there. We got a goal of 25,000 letters collectively. That's across, the entire network. We want to show up in Victoria with those 25,000 letters. I think we're just pushing 9,000 ourselves, so that's fantastic. It's one organization with 9,000 letters. I'd say we're right on track to get that 25,000.
Yeah, we're certainly punching above our weight, right? So
absolutely, yeah. No, I'm very, very appreciative of what our members have done, and our committee, right? Our government engagement committee's been working hard.
Absolutely,
we've been getting the word out. And we got lots of letters as well. We've got local fish and game organizations.
Yeah.
We've got local stores. They've got letters there. If you're interested and you haven't signed it, go to our website. There's a link on our homepage to Act Now. But also go to your local fish and game store and sign the letter there.
Yeah,
And
get
if it's
them
not there,
involved.
ask them why and bring some letters in on our behalf.
Yeah, we
So
know there's a lot of people out there that aren't on social media, so that's where our listeners come in. You go talk to your grandfather, go talk to your dad, go talk to mom, neighbors, talk to people that enjoy and recreate in the outdoors, because this is about more than just hunting, right? Uh, it's about sound wildlife management, and that's where, as we say many times, this is our hill to die on, and it's the death by 1,000 cuts. Because if you think it'll stop at just hunting, it's not going to. We know some of these groups, we've said it before, don't even want you to catch and release fish. Some of them don't want you hiking or recreating in the back country at all. So we don't want to give them an inch. We need to stand hard and stand fast. Engage your MLA. Make a phone call to your local paper. Write an op-ed. Just get it out there that you want wildlife managed properly by the best available science. Because we've seen it before. Grizzly hunt. If you haven't seen what Minister Donaldson at the time said, he said that we know that it's not about science. This is because people don't want it. So science is damned in this situation. We need to remind people that we hunt, remind people that we fish, remind people that we are shooters, we recreate in the backcountry, and we also need to remind our elected officials that we vote, and they need to remember that we will vote accordingly. So get off your butts and help us.
yeah, well said, Steve. Yeah, really good. All right, so with that, go to our website, homepage, wildsheepsociety.com, and Act Now is there. Click on the link, and it honestly takes you 15 seconds, 30 if you're slow. So with that, we've actually got some good news for a change in the wild sheep community. We talked to Chris Procter. He's the senior wildlife biologist for Flynn Row in Region 3. Chris has been doing a ton of work on the landscape for 2 decades now, 15 years he's been with the ministry. Episode 28, we talk about our project on the Fraser River for wild sheep and how we're seeing some successes there. So this is a great listen. Chris has been heavily involved right from the very start. He's been part of the project. He's been involved in building it, managing it, and more importantly, executing it. So great listen with Chris Procter. You're going to enjoy this one, and some really positive outcomes coming out of that project. This has been our largest financial investment ever for the Wild Sheep Society of BC.
And this is essentially why the Wild Sheep Society of BC started, is this area.
Absolutely, yeah.
So
that's exactly what it
throws
is.
back to our roots there, and we get an update on where we were and where we are now. So it's a good time.
Episode 28, Chris Procter. Enjoy the listen.
If we told you tomorrow that elk, black bear, and bighorn sheep were next, would you speak up? Wildlife needs to be managed by science and not by emotion. And you don't have to be a hunter to take part in this movement. You just have to want sound management of our wildlife in BC. Go to wildsheepsociety.com/act now to use your voice and demand that BC not use our wildlife as pawns in a game of social management. Act now. Or the things that you love could be next.
Good day, Chris. How's it going?
It's going good. Yep. Hey, Kyle. Hey, Steve.
How you doing?
Chris, are you sitting at home right now? I know like there was COVID stuff. You guys have had lots of restrictions around work and all kinds of stuff like that. So are you sitting at home in your office, or where are you at right now?
I am at home. Yep.
Okay.
I'm working at home quite a bit these days when I'm not in the field.
Nice. Yep. How many days would you say a month you're putting in, like, on the backs of wildlife out in the wilderness doing your stuff? Like, I know it's really busy February, March, April, and then it kind of slows down in, I guess, April, really, right?
Yeah. Well, the busy times tend to be the fall, through the winter, and through the spring. Through the summer, things are a bit quieter on the wildlife front. We do some of our work at that time, like mountain goat surveys and that kind of thing. But through the winter and spring, yeah, I'd say we're in the field probably 75% of the time.
Is that right, eh? Wow. Yeah.
Yep.
Cool. Well, I'm going to talk a little bit about that in a bit, but before we jump into it, let's just go back and talk a little bit about you, Chris. I know that you've been in the wildlife biology through the ministry, Flynn Row, for almost 2 decades now. You've been doing great work on the landscape. Your name always comes up with these great projects, but Can you talk a little bit about your background, how you got started in the wildlife world and kind of the work that you've done in the past?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I think going way back, like hunting as a child, growing up hunting with my father. I remember running into a wildlife biologist when we were hunting, actually, West Williams Lake, and I think I was probably 15 or something. Didn't really know anything about the field at that time. Ran into this guy out in the bush, and he was telling me a bit about his job and stuff. And yeah, I'd say from that point forward, that's what I wanted to do. So following high school, I went to university. Well, I went to college first, actually in Alberta, then to university in Prince George. And yeah, got a job right away. I worked in Alberta for a while with the Canadian Wildlife Service. Got a job here in BC on the South Coast. Initially worked there for a couple of years for the ministry, and then been in Region 3 ever since.
That's awesome,
Been
Chris.
in
So
Region
now,
3
when
since.
sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say I've been in Region 3 since 2008. I started working for the ministry in 2005.
So what was your background in school? What did you take? Was it wildlife biology? What did you take in terms of your studies?
I took a degree in wildlife management, yeah, at University of Northern British Columbia, Prince George.
Fantastic. So then, now with your work, obviously you're doing a lot of wild sheep work. I know you're involved with moose. I guess in BC, you guys are jack of all trades. We have ungulate specialists and all kinds of stuff, but like in Region 3, you're a senior wildlife biologist. Is your purview every species in that region, or how does that work? Like how do you manage wildlife in that region?
Yeah, I mean, we are responsible for wildlife management for all species. There's 3 biologists that work in Region 3. We sort of split things up a little bit. Like, we got a guy that works on most of the carnivore stuff, and then there's 2 of us that tend to look after most of the ungulate stuff. Harvested species take up a lot of our time, but we deal with everything from beavers to grizzly bears. Yeah, so it's a whole range of stuff. Most of my work is directed at ungulate management in particular, and I'd say I'd spend most of my time working with sheep, moose, and mule deer, probably the big 3.
Right on. So just out of curiosity, Chris, and this is for me, is do you guys have a lot of latitude? Like it's kind of like, if you see an area of greatest needs, or is it mandated where the ministry says, hey, this is really important, these are our priorities? Or do you have the ability to slide, within the boundaries and sort of focus on maybe something you're passionate about or something that you feel needs more work? How does that work? Is it government driven, or do you have a lot of latitude there?
We have a lot of latitude. I mean, we're the folks that are on the ground seeing what the issues are, so we can certainly direct our time towards what we think are the important issues happening on the landscape. There are times where directions come down from above, for sure, but I'd say there's a fair bit of latitude in the position overall. Yeah.
So that probably makes it a lot more rewarding. You have the ability to sort of, focus on areas that as opposed to doing something, focusing on what someone else is telling you to do. I would imagine that would make it a bit more exciting.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay, so now, Chris, one of the things we wanted to talk to you about today is the Wild Sheep Society BC has been quite heavily invested in this Region 3 Fraser River project for Bighorns. And it extends it really to the whole Fraser River ecosystem. Region 5's on our radar as well. And I know our project chair, Chris Barker, is always harassing you, giving you a hard time and trying to, find sheep projects. And I know Chris spends a lot of time speaking with you. So, one of the things we've embarked in is back in, I guess it was 2018, we got involved with this Region 3 project. And I know you've been kind of spearheading it for us. So, can we just talk a little bit about what that program is and what it entails? Just kind of a high level stuff. And I guess probably the best way to do it is let's go back to maybe the history of the Region 3 and I guess the Fraser River ecosystem and really what precipitated this. Why are we so concerned about it? Why are we doing the work here? Why are we investing this kind of capital and resources into this region? So let's start with that, I guess, with the history of the region for starts.
Sure. Yeah, well, the Fraser River, yeah, pretty important sheep population for British Columbia. Approximately 60% of the California bighorn sheep are found on the Fraser River in Canada or British Columbia. That sheep population declined pretty heavily in the late 90s. Prior to that, there was probably around, on the Fraser River itself, there was probably around 2,400 sheep between, say, Lillooet and the Junction Sheep Range in Region 5. Now there's about 800 in that same area. By the early 2000s, it had declined to about 1,200 sheep. Essentially continued to decline since then. At the time, we had attributed those declines to lungworm and associated pneumonia resulting from that. I think looking back now that, back then we didn't know a lot about mycoplasma ovipneumoniae, or MOVI for short. But I think looking back now and just the pattern of where these bands have declined and where they never recovered, I think if we knew everything, it was probably MOVI related declines in the 90s, and we've been experiencing this complex pattern of decline in different bands of sheep ever since. And when some of those bands declined in the 90s, some of them declined by up to 90% and have not recovered since. Others have recovered a little bit, and there's kind of a whole mix of stuff going on there. But so I think, we first detected MOVI on the Fraser River about 10 years ago. And it's probably only in the last 10 years that we've actually been able to test for it. And we found it in 2 bands of sheep on the east side of the Fraser River in Region 3, at Big Bar Creek and Pavilion Creek. And I think it's been there for 20 years. And I think it's probably one of the main things that's preventing recovery of sheep in this population. And the thing about MOVI, once that initial affection occurs, it's pretty complex and it's widely variable in what happens afterwards. But, sometimes you might have an all age die off. Sometimes the adult sheep aren't affected and it's mostly affecting recruitment. The thing that tends to happen, and it doesn't happen all the time, but you end up with some of these adult female sheep that do not mount a immune response to the bacteria, and they end up living with it, shedding it through their nose, and it persists in the population for decades or longer, even maybe forever in some cases, by the females shedding that bacteria through their nose. They give it to their young lambs. The lambs through the summer are highly social in their nursery groups, and they end up passing that bacteria to each other. And often by the fall, most of the lambs are dead. We've certainly seen lots of examples where there are 0 lambs surviving by September. And in some bands of sheep, it might not be that severe. You might see, some lambs surviving, but generally the pattern is low lamb survival, low lamb recruitment that prevents that population from recovering into the future. And the Fraser River, I think it's just complicated by the fact that we have, 150 kilometers of sheep habitat and dozens of scattered groups of sheep. And as you can imagine, there are some lambs that survive. So you create more of these females that live with the disease, shed it, over time as you go. So to wait for it to naturally die out, may never happen in a place like the Fraser River where, there's probably a chronically shedding female somewhere at some time. And that, hoping for those circumstances to arrive such that all those shedding females die out at the same time, just it's not very likely.
Yeah, so there's a couple points. Chris, there's a couple points there that, I guess, and we'll talk about why this is so important coming up about removing those infected females. But, like you said, those females can continue, they're healthy enough that they can continue their life, but then the lamb recruitment's so low. So that's obviously the key takeaway there, and why it's important that we're going to manage these unhealthy females, which we'll jump into when we get to later on into the project here. There's a couple things I just want to, for our listeners, point out that, this California bighorn population is really important to BC. Like you said, it's 60% of all bighorns, California bighorns in the province, and that's been a seed spot for transplants all across North America, right? So we've taken California bighorns out of that Fraser River ecosystem and transplanted them across North America. So it's really, this has been a great source for, and because of this disease issue, we haven't done that for, since I've been involved with wild sheep, I haven't seen it. You've probably seen it in your early days, but I've never experienced it, right? So.
Yeah, great point. Starting back in the 50s, this Fraser River sheep population was a nursery group for sheep that got translocated across the United States, California, Washington, Oregon, Nevada, Utah, and there's probably a few others that I've forgotten. So really important from that perspective. The other important thing that I'd highlight with these sheep is that the Fraser River metapopulation in itself, which is composed of all the sheep that are on the Fraser River, as well as a couple bands of sheep that are just off, living in mostly alpine environments. So there are some unique ecotypes or life history strategies associated with these sheep. Some are migratory between, high elevation summer range and low elevation winter range on the Fraser River. Others live in alpine environments year round. So that, maintaining that diversity of sheep on the landscape is high value too.
For sure. So Chris, one thing that I was going to ask you when you were talking there is, like we know in the Okanagan with the highway there, we have the infected population, the east versus west, and how the highway keeps them separated, and disease is kind of more prevalent on the one side versus the other. But if we look at the Fraser River, west versus east, that's not necessarily the case, is it? We have disease events on both sides of the Fraser. It's widespread. Is that not the case?
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, that river is not much of a barrier. We've certainly seen rams cross the river. We've had cases of ear tag females crossing the river, and we have identified shedding individuals on both sides of the river, from the south to the north. Yeah.
Okay. And then just one other quick one for you here. So you mentioned these subpopulations and the massive die-off and up to 60% in many cases. Chasm is the one that really sticks out for me. So I think it was 2013. You guys, it was documented where there was roughly 100 in that herd, dropped to 25, and then I think in 2017, 2018 there was some involvement with wild sheep, and I think there was only 17 individuals captured or something like that. So that's a classic example where it's a pretty serious die-off to almost extirpation in that herd, really, right?
Yeah. We had 120 sheep in that herd. And over one winter, we were down to 28, I think the following spring. That was in 2013. Essentially no lamb recruitment since. At the time we put a bunch of radio collars on sheep there, and the adults have just kind of slowly, died out over the last 7 years or so, 8 years, to the point that last fall, there was 15 sheep 12 females and 3 rams.
Wow. For somebody on the outside who doesn't know, what is MOVI and how does it work? How is it transmitted? Like what happens when you got an infected
Yeah,
sheep?
great question. So MOVI is mycoplasma ovipneumoniae. It is a bacteria that ultimately it causes pneumonia in wild sheep. It generally is sourced from domestic sheep or domestic goats. Those species they're adapted to it, so they live with it, but wild sheep are not. So when sheep get infected, it ultimately causes pneumonia. And like I was saying earlier, upon that initial infection, it's widely variable how what happens. Sometimes there's a huge die-off, like we saw at the chasm. In other cases, you may not see that die-off, and it just seems to affect the lambs more so than the adults. But essentially, yeah, I think I already spoke to that. The the concern is that a few of these individual adult females, they end up living with this bacteria, shedding it through their nose. They do not mount an immune response. So I should back up a little bit. Some sheep do, when exposed to it, will mount an immune response and they will beat it. There is that small proportion that does not mount an immune response, and they end up living with it, shedding it, and passing it to young lambs on an annual basis. So, and then, the lambs passing it to each other, and often they're dead by the fall.
Wow, sounds like a hell of a way to go.
Yeah, for sure. So, Chris, what I'd like to do now is jump into like the project itself. So we know a little bit about the history. We know the importance of it. So Wild Sheep Society BC has been involved with this from the start. I know you have as the senior wildlife biologist in Region 3. Let's talk a bit about the few of the the key players here. So I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about Jeremy, his involvement. Talk about if you like, I can jump into the funding partners on this. I know you're familiar with it too. But let's just talk about who's involved and how does a project like this come together? Like, how did this get started? Like, obviously, we know this problem. It always exists. Obviously, it's something you want to make a difference with. But how does something like that get moved into, okay, we've got 3 years, we've got a couple $100,000, we got helicopters, we got volunteers, we got people on the ground. How does that evolve from where you are?
Yeah, well, I can speak to how this came about for sure. So we, seeing that lack of recovery in that sheep population for 20 years, learning more about MOVI as we go here over the last 10 years. Like I said, we've only been able to actually test for it and detect that bacteria for probably the last 10 years or 11 years or something. So it was something that we've been thinking a lot about. We didn't have the resources to do anything about it until Chris Barker phoned me up one day. And he said, if you want to do it, let's do it. I'll find you the money to start out. And that's kind of how it started. So I think that first year, the Wild Sheep Society invested a pretty significant chunk of funding to do the initial surveillance sampling. So we thought that was probably the best first step, is to actually try and figure out where MOVI is on the landscape, the distribution of it, and the prevalence of it by randomly sampling sheep, across the entire Fraser River, basically, from Lillooet to north of the Junction Sheep Range. And we developed some other partnerships as we went. So yeah, the BC Wild Sheep Separation Program and our coordinator there, Jeremy Ayotte, and sought out other funding to make this happen. So the other key funder has been the Wild Sheep Foundation, and Jeremy has been leading the funding applications and that kind of stuff for us there. And that all this, this was in 2018 roughly. So I think we did that first sampling across the Fraser River in the spring of 2019.
Okay, yeah, fantastic. So I think that initial budget was 152,000 roughly, and then yeah, of course, there's a lot of effort put on. A lot of the stuff from the ministry was in kind, basically your work on this, right? Your involvement, and then Wild Sheep Society, Wild Sheep BC, Midwest chapter, the Wild Sheep Foundation. They were, I think, they put 32,000 into the project as well. But it's interesting. Even industry, we look at Canadian Wildlife Capture, they donated, I think, $13,000 in kind in helicopter time for this, right? So, it's quite a broad based. And then, I know local First Nations was involved as well, certainly with on the ground work 2 years ago. Was that you that was involved with bringing local First Nations in, or how does that involvement work, Chris? That relationship as well.
Yeah, well, wild sheep are obviously important to First Nations on the Fraser River, so we engaged with the Stallion First Nation right off the bat. I shouldn't say it was right off the bat. We did that initial surveillance sampling first to try and understand the problem that we were actually dealing with there, and then once we realized that, we saw evidence of exposure to MOVI and/or shedding individuals up and down, throughout the entire area, we engaged with First Nations at that point. We actually have a working group established with the Stallion First Nation and 6 of the northern communities about this work going on out there. So, and we definitely, we've been trying to involve those folks on the ground wherever possible.
Okay, that's awesome. So now, with regards to the project, so there was year one. It's a 3-year project, was originally identified, and best I can tell, Chris, from the original funding report I've seen from Jeremy, the project's evolved a little bit as you'd expect, but there became this process of test and remove, which I think we're going to jump into. But you just said that first year you were trying to understand them. Do you remember how many individuals were collared and that sort of stuff? Do you have any numbers on that? I've seen it written, but you probably, I don't know if you recall those numbers. There's a lot of stuff that's gone on since then, but it's quite significant. It was close to 50 or 60 animals, I think.
Yeah, no, I mean, the initial surveillance sampling, we caught 52 sheep in Region 3 and about 30 in Region 5. So we were shooting for roughly 10% of the sheep. And those are kind of some sampling guidelines that come from, the Wild Sheep Working Group, WAFA Wild Sheep Working Group. So our objective at the time was to catch 10% of every group of sheep that we could find on the Fraser River. And given that there's about 800 sheep, we ended up with about 82.
Wow, perfect.
On the Region 3 side, we collared 40 females at the same time that we did those captures. And in Region 5, we put 18 collars on those 30 sheep we caught there.
Okay.
Our objective with the collaring, I was just going to say our objective with the collaring at the time was just to determine survival rates, causes of mortality, and the degree of connectivity between these different bands of sheep on the landscape.
So a couple questions there. One, I understand that there was nasal and blood serum work done as well, so you tested there. I want to pick your brain on the results of that. And then the other one is, what did you guys find with the connectivity? That's the one thing I haven't really seen too much on. I'm curious as to what you found from that.
Yeah, good questions. So the initial sampling, there's 2 things we're looking for. We're looking for those individuals that are shedding that bacteria through their nose. We determine that by taking a nasal swab, and then a lab test it's a PCR test to look for DNA associated with the specific bug that we're looking for. In this case, it's MOVI. The other thing we're looking for, we take blood samples from these sheep, and we're looking for their history of exposure to MOVI. So looking for those individuals that actually mounted an immune response, have antibodies for MOVI in their blood. And that, when you think about it, if say 10% of the sheep are actually individuals that shed that disease, and then we're randomly catching 10% of the sheep, your actual odds of catching a shedding sheep are pretty low, like 1% or, somewhere around there. So that history of exposure tells us a lot about, whether MOVI's been there in the past. And if you see it, that history of exposure, then I think you need to assume that it's everywhere in between where you've made those observations. So we saw a history of exposure, right from Lillooet to north of the junction. The number, I think it was somewhere around 20% of the sheep we captured had evidence that they had been exposed to it, so antibodies. And then about 10% of the sheep were actually shedding the bacteria. Sorry, Kyle, I forgot your second question.
So yeah, I got one more question on that. So with regards to that, with those results, so you guys knew there was disease issues. Like you said initially, you thought lungworm was the concern, and then we started testing. Was it much more prevalent than expected, or was that kind of like, yeah, no, this is what we expected? Were you guys kind of surprised at results? It sounds like, it's pretty significant, obviously. Is that what you guys thought you'd see?
I suspected that we would see it everywhere, just given the lack of recovery and the pattern of low lamb survival. When you look up and down across all these bands of sheep on the Fraser River. At the time, I think I expected to see more individuals shedding it, but I think looking back now, it's just the nature of a small fraction, this 10% that we're actually sampling, and your actual probability of catching one of those individuals is pretty low. So I think if you see it at all, like I said, you need to assume that it's almost everywhere.
Yeah, right on.
At
and
that,
my
at
other
that
question,
sampling rate.
right? Yeah, no, for sure. And my other question for you was, did you guys learn anything about the connectivity? Did you find, that the movements were more widespread, less widespread? Was it kind of consistent with what you thought you'd see?
I think that, while we're still collecting that data, so we have in Region 3, what do we got? We got about 2 years of data now. I'd say those bands of sheep that, we, over the years, we've roughly determined where these nursery groups are, and we name those bands of sheep. We give them a name oftentimes. Those bands of sheep are a little more connected than I thought. We knew from, radio collaring projects in the past that often all these bands of sheep will be connected by rams, for example, moving, rut-related movements in the fall. But yeah, there's a little more connectivity between these bands with the females in these nursery groups than I think we expected. They're highly connected.
Cool.
It's like a chain of connections all the way up the Fraser River, basically.
Right. Yeah, and I think aside from probably our northern thinhorns, that Fraser River ecosystem is the most connected, ecosystem in BC, certainly, right? Because everything else south of that is pretty fragmented for the most part.
Yeah, and those sheep are connected to other important sheep herds too, right? Like Spence's Bridge, for example. Direct connections to the Fraser River there. And
cool. Okay, Chris. So we have year one. We got the samples. We had a good understanding of where everything was. So let's move into year two, which was 2019, 2020. So that would have been, the fall and winter of 19, spring of 20. What happened there? What kind of and what were some of the findings and outcomes of that process?
Yeah, so once we determined, once we understood what we were dealing with, which is basically the idea that MOVI is probably everywhere. There's only two things you can do at that time. You can either stand by, let it play out naturally, and hope that it fixes itself at some point down the road. that didn't seem like a great option because we had been dealing with, this lack of recovery for 20 years or whatever on the Fraser River. The other option is to attempt to treat the disease. There's not too many ways of dealing with that. It can't actually be treated with with an antibiotic, that kind of thing. The only way it can be treated is to try and identify those individual females that are shedding that bacteria to their lambs and removing those from the population. So that's what we set out to do in over that winter, 2019 and 20, in two areas. One, we picked the one band of sheep on the west side of the Fraser River where we saw the highest prevalence of shedding individuals and the highest number that had been exposed to MOVI from that initial sampling, which was a band of about 50 sheep just north of Watson Bar Creek on the west side of the Fraser River. And then the second band that we were treating that winter was the Chasm band of sheep. So, test and remove, basically seeking to identify those individuals that are shedding that bacteria and removing those from the population. It requires catching, our objective was to catch all of the females in those bands. So at Watson Bar Creek, we estimated there's approximately 50 sheep there that we needed to catch. At the Chasm, we were down to a dozen females. So that's what we did. We caught all of them all of them on the Fraser River with a helicopter. At the Chasm, we did catch a few on the ground, and then the rest of them with a helicopter. And we tested those sheep for, the presence of mycoplasma ovipneumoniae in their nasal passages. And if they were healthy, they got released. If they were not, we euthanized them at the, on the spot there.
So Chris, quick one there. So historically, when you caught sheep, you'd have to catch them. You'd do maybe a nasal swab. You'd maybe do blood serum work. You'd send it off to a lab. You'd wait 6 weeks, and then you'd get your results. Now, it's my understanding that with this Fraser River project, this is the first time ever where you guys actually had 2 active biomemes, and you're actually able to do the PCR test right on the ground. At least that's documented that we know of. Can you talk a little bit about what the biomeme is, what the PCR, and I think with COVID, people know that term now, PCR and that sort of stuff. So I think that was kind of a game changer, right? Because you wouldn't have been able to do that test and remove if you didn't have that the technology to do it. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, no, it's a good point. We so the biomeme, it's brand new technology. It is a portable PCR, so the same test that you would do in a lab setting normally, we could do on site with these biomeme units. And so we've had a couple different approaches. We've been doing this for 2 years now. So speaking on the first year, our general approach was, and we were kind of hoping to, one-stop shop kind of thing. So yeah, you're right. In the past, we would catch a sheep, take a nasal swab, put a collar on it, go back home, send that nasal swab to a lab, and then we had to wait for those results to know whether that sheep had MOVI or not. With these biomeme units, we were able to test on site and make that decision, as to whether it was healthy or not at the time. So in the first year, we caught sheep. We actually slung them to a central processing station site that we set up kind of in the middle of our study area there, where we had a big crew of people there. We had like our vet, Helen was there. She was kind of running the show at the site. We were catching sheep slinging them to the site. It takes about an hour to run this test, these nasal swabs through the biomeme. So we were keeping sheep down for, an hour at site and then making decisions as to whether we release them or euthanize them based on the results from those biomemes. So we needed a big crew of people. I mean, we had, these sheep were sedated once they got to the site, just because we were keeping them down for an hour to run the PCR on the biomemes. And it was a big show with, we had a whole bunch of volunteers there, Wild Sheep Society guys, some of the Statlium community members were there. Conservation Officer Service was there. Filter Studios was there. Arcadia Outfitting. He's the outfitter in the area. He was there. On the second year, we did it a little differently. I don't know if you want to talk about that now.
Yeah, sure. Let's jump right into it, Chris. That makes sense. Yeah.
So the second year, which was just this past winter, we treated a second and third band of sheep kind of south of that initial group at Watson Park Creek. Given COVID and restrictions around, having big group of people there, to the manpower required to do this with biomemes and keeping sheep down on site for an hour and that kind of thing. And just given that, it's pretty hard on those sheep to keep them down for an hour and a half, we tried a different approach this last winter, where we bought cheap radio collars, and we just captured sheep, took the nasal swabs, put a radio collar on every individual that we captured, and then we ran the biomeme samples. We took multiple swabs from each individual. We ran the biomeme samples in the evening at our, where we were based out of, and we also sent a swab to the lab after the fact. And I think, just given the technology with, these portable PCRs is new, there's a ton of experience required in interpreting the outputs from that. And that, we're still learning on how to interpret that. So we saw, given the fact that we couldn't get a big group of people together, given COVID, the issues around keeping those sheep down for an hour and a half, we thought that this might be a more efficient way of, and possibly cheaper way of doing the same thing, and a little bit simpler. So so this year, and then some of the outputs from the biomemes, some of it's pretty straightforward. You might have a classic response, for sure with high degree of confidence that sheep has MOVI. And we could remove those ones at that time because we were running those samples in the evening. So we would just go remove that in, those individuals the next day. And then we also had the backup swabs that we sent to a lab just in case we missed something with interpreting those outputs from the biomeme. So that did happen. And we went back and removed the sheep, a couple weeks later.
So, Chris, if we could just back up. So, and I want to talk about year 3 here, but with year 2, I think you tested 47 individuals. There was 46 ewes and 1 juvenile ram. How many do you guys end up removing roughly? Obviously, everyone that tested positive for MOVI was removed. Do you remember the numbers that came out of that?
Yep. We captured 47 sheep. I think a couple of those were young rams. So we were actually including the young rams if they were hanging around with these female groups. We were testing those too. And we removed 11 sheep that first year.
Right. Yeah. It's interesting with that. I talked to a few guys that were down there for the project helping out volunteering, and they said it was pretty, it was obviously, an emotional experience. Maybe you as a bio and your science background, you're doing it for the right reason. But I know a few of my buddies that were there, they were just, they said it was pretty emotional. But the hard thing is you get a sheep come in and it looked ragged, haggard. You think, oh yeah, she's a mess and she's going to be positive and probably, and you test her and she'd be fine. And then the next one would come in to be a healthy individual, and you're like, no problem. And all of a sudden, she's tested positive for MOVI. So, certainly it wasn't directly a reflection of what you're seeing on the landscape all the time. And it was a pretty emotional process, having to see these put down in certain cases, right? So.
Yeah, you bet. I was spending most of my time doing the sheep capture, so I wasn't actually on site. But the times that I were, it was, it was a pretty emotional experience for a lot of the people that were there. And yeah, you're right. Trying to ID an individual on the landscape with MOVI is not an easy thing. Some are obvious. You might see a sheep that's kind of snotty looking and coughing and stuff, but some of them asymptomatic, right? You wouldn't be able to pick them out of a crowd of sheep looking at them.
So we talked about year 1, year 2, and we touched on year 3 here. What were your numbers for year 3? We've kind of seen all the numbers year 1, year 2. How many did you capture year 3? And are you done now? And sort of where do things go from here for region 3? And then if you want to jump into region 5 as well.
Yeah. So this past winter, we treated a second and third band of sheep south of that initial group that we treated at Watson Park Creek. And we captured 46 sheep there, 2 of which we determined were shedding MOVI and were removed. So a much lower rate than we saw the first year, but another group of sheep where, lamb survival has been generally poor. We tend to see a few more lambs in this group than we had at, say, Watson Bar Creek, for example. But overall, over the last couple of years, it's been really poor lamb survival there too. And I think, these numbers kind of jive. We saw a higher number of shedding individuals in that Watson Bar band. And, the last couple of years, there's been 0 lambs surviving in that band of sheep. And then to the south, a similar number of sheep, fewer individuals shedding it, and then some lambs obviously have been surviving because the lamb ratios were a little higher there. But so that's where we're at on the Fraser River.
Cool. So now I think overall, my understanding is we've seen a change. We've seen this past year. So we did the test and selective removal in the winter 1920. And then you guys were in the field last fall looking at recruitment rates, and you noticed some differences. Is that correct? Am I correct in that?
Yeah, you're correct. Yeah, it appears hugely successful. We so the Watson Bar band of sheep, and maybe I'll just back up, one step here and just mention that I should mention our approach. Our approach was to take it a bit slow here. Bit of a pilot project, if you will, where we're going to try this treatment on a couple bands of sheep, monitor the response, and if it all appears successful, then we are likely going to ramp this up in the future. So that's kind of what we did. So we started with the first band of sheep 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago. Those, once you remove those shedding females, the idea is that when they have their lambs the following spring, like a couple months later, that there shouldn't be a chronically shedding female to transmit that bacteria to their lambs, and therefore lamb survival should be higher through the summer. So we had Wild Sheep Society members monitoring that band of sheep through last summer. Just because the last few years we've actually been doing these lamb counts in the fall, just to make sure we're past that period of time when, most lambs would end up dead from MOVI. We'd been doing those counts in November. So we followed that up with an aerial survey in November. And at Watson Bar Creek, the couple falls previous, there's been 0 lambs surviving there. And then last fall, there was about 25 lambs there. So approximately 50% of the females had a surviving lamb. And then those lambs have continued to survive. We were just out there a couple of weeks ago, and still pretty close to the same number of lambs. Yeah, it's unbelievable, and the same effect at the chasm. So, it's smaller group of sheep. We had to remove 2 individuals of the 12 females that were there, and then just a couple weeks ago we were out there and we saw 6 lambs. So 6 lambs for 10 females.
That's
We've not seen
fantastic.
that number of lambs there since 2013 or 12. Yeah.
So then, Chris, moving forward with this, so we, uh, at least initial indications are this works, this system works. It's positive, and it's probably not an anomaly. There's a direct correlation there. So, um, what does this mean? Like, for do we still manage these herds? Will you guys still do test and remove on the chasm herd? Will you still do that with the herds that you tested for on the Fraser? Or is this expanding new herds? What does it look like? Where do you see it evolving from here moving forward, I guess?
Yeah. So, yeah, like I said, we're gonna take it slow here. By the time that this, next winter rolls around, we will have results from 2 years from where we started at Watson Bar Creek. We will have results from 2 years at the chasm, and we will have results from, the first summer following treatment for the second and third bands of sheep that we just treated on the Fraser River. And I think if it looks successful in all cases, that yeah, we're planning to ramp this up. Right now, we are in the process of trying to figure out where all these treatment areas would be on the entire Fraser River and how many sheep are in each, so that we can come up with a bit of a plan on how we tackle this here in the coming years. At our current rate, just given that, the number of sheep on the Fraser River, and if we're just treating, one band a year, it's going to take probably, 12 to 15 years to treat all those sheep. So I think we got to ramp it up here once we're comfortable with the approach, just so we can get this done in a timely fashion.
So obviously, right now, you guys are looking at this. I'm sure you're talking to Francis about it. Does this involve dialogue with Jeremy? And then, do you guys see anything happening this fall? Like, are we going to do anything in the fall of 2021? I guess. Do you see anything going on over the winter there, or is it kind of, you're going to build a plan and then it's down the road we'll start implementing it?
No, I think, yeah, right now. So, we have a crew, um, Jeremy, Francis, Chris Barker, and basically this working group that I spoke about, where we are going to prioritize how we do this going forward. I think on our, so we're going to monitor lamb survival through this coming summer for areas that we already treated. The other thing I forgot to mention actually was the other half of actually assessing this, the treatment effect here is actually catching some of those surviving lambs, which we just did here a couple weeks ago, and testing those for exposure to Movi. The idea being that if there is a shedding female remaining in those groups that we treated, you should see it in the lambs first. So we actually just caught a bunch of lambs at Watson Bar Creek, and at the chasm, and we're just waiting on the results there. But they looked really good, and just given the lamb numbers, it's highly unlikely there's a shedding female there. So that kind of work to monitor the response to these treatments is going to be ongoing. And then, yeah, it's coming. So, we're going to do those counts in the fall. Hopefully, I think we're going to have Wild Sheep Society members out there monitoring lamb survival through the summer for these treated areas. And at this point, next winter, we are hoping to at least treat the band of sheep north of Watson Bar. And I think, it's another one of about 40 to 50 sheep that has very low lamb survival in recent years. So that's the plan right now. And then, the broader plan that I just spoke about we're just trying to come up with a longer term plan on how you might treat all the sheep on the Fraser River and what it might cost in any given year and that kind of thing.
Yeah, we're obviously looking at millions in that case. Probably like that Fraser project was $150, and that was at the onset. I know we spent a bit more than that, and then Chasm was on top of that. So, it's obviously a multi-million-dollar investment, but it's one of the things we're actually seeing success. We've done so many different things. We're trying to improve habitat work, and but this is the one thing we've actually seen a correlation between the work that's been done around disease and a positive effect on the landscape. So it's actually must be pretty energizing for you as a biologist to see that sort of success, hey Chris?
Yeah, no, yeah, you're right. It's great to see a win on the landscape, and hopefully, hopefully these are long-term results that we're seeing here. I think if we see the same sort of effect on lamb survival over a period of, a couple of years, I think, I think I would consider it pretty successful. And likely, if you implemented that at a larger scale, that you are likely to see that same success everywhere, right? So that's what we're hoping for.
Well, I like the thought of, what did you tell me? You just said 2,400 sheep on the Fraser. I like that number. That seems like a good number to me. So I think we should work for that.
Oh yeah, yeah. If you could get back to there, it'd be unreal. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Do you honestly think it's achievable, Chris? Like if we can sort of sort this issue out, do you think, obviously the carrying capacity was there, the habitat really hasn't probably changed a whole lot, but really if we sort the disease issue, in theory, we should be able to get back to that number, right?
I think so. Yeah. I mean, there are other issues affecting sheep. Habitat in some places is a bit of an issue, I think. Predation, with those collared sheep that we actually collared out there, we've measured pretty significant predation rates on females by cougars in some areas there. So I think that could be limiting sheep a little bit. But, the first step, I mean, you got to deal with this disease first, right? Any other management action that you might implement on the landscape is not expected to be successful if you have disease operating there first. So, I think that's the first step. And I know, we've been talking with Wild Sheep Society, with you guys, with Chris and stuff about, getting going on implementing a burning program too, in conjunction with a bunch of this work. So that's ongoing too, and probably likely focused in areas where we've treated sheep already, right? So
I know with Chris Barker, he talked to me 4 or 5 years ago that he had this in his mind. He had a vision where, to see those numbers back, that 2,400 sheep on the Fraser, and exactly that. Like, let's sort the disease issue, and then we can work on habitat. We can work on all these other things, but we can't do anything until the disease. So he's talked about that for the longest time. Ever since I've known Chris, that's one of the first things he talked about to me. And appreciate what you're doing there, Chris, what your team is doing. And, it's just so encouraging to talk to somebody about wild sheep and hear a small success story, because we have so many uphill battles we're fighting every day. And I know you as a regional biologist, and you're dealing with moose and a whole bunch of other species across the landscape, and you're seeing it even worse, right? You're seeing declines in certain populations. And so, really grateful for what you've done to lead this and all the effort you put in. And, every picture I see, you're out there with a net gun chasing these sheep down and putting the time in and managing all this and putting it all in. It's pretty exciting, man. I'm really grateful for it. And I think our members are too. So thank you.
Yeah, you bet. It is very exciting work. And it's very exciting to see a response that hopefully might turn this whole thing around down the road here. So
I guess as we start to wrap up here, what advice or what recommendations or what thoughts can you offer our members? What could they do? What can they do to support this? Obviously, there's a financial component. We have volunteers on the landscape, but what could they do? And, any last parting thoughts or about the project moving forward?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the most helpful things, for folks that are out there on the ground is just keeping your eyes open on, the health of wild sheep, it's really difficult to know, for example, where domestic sheep end up on the landscape. Sometimes, they're there and gone before we even know about it. So any observations of domestic sheep are really useful to us. Observations on the health of wild sheep, if you see sheep coughing or anything out of the ordinary, yeah, we sure like to hear about that stuff too.
How would somebody
The more eyes.
how would somebody get a hold of you if they were to witness that stuff?
Well, yeah, good question. Yeah, my contact info is on the government directory online, for example. So searching my name, it'll come up. Or even through the wild sheep site, I get tons of reports. You guys know who I am, so if you get the report, pass it along, right? That kind of thing.
Yeah, we can include that in the show notes as well. Awesome.
Yeah, we'll put that in the show notes for sure. And then, the provincial wild sheep and mountain goat specialist Bill Jex released an app recently around wild sheep and mountain goat sighting. Is that something that you get access to, Chris, or does that benefit you? Probably the most effective is to reach out directly to you, but also run it through that app. Or what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I do have access to those data. So I think both are good avenues to submit those observations for sure.
I guess the most immediate response is just to reach directly out to you. So we'll definitely include your contact info here and your home address and everything. No, I'm just kidding. But
well, it's like I said, sometimes with these issues like domestic sheep on the landscape, there's been cases, I'm sure, where sheep have been there and then they're gone before we even know about it, right? And so if you tend to see like evidence that Movi is affecting a sheep herd, but we didn't know anything about domestic sheep being in the area, you just having that information alone is really useful to sort out things after the fact, right? So
cool. Well, that's kind of all I have for you, Steve. Anything you want to wrap up with, Chris?
No, it's every time we get a chance to discuss Movi, no matter who it's with, it's always a sobering conversation that it's so drastic, so prevalent, and so preventable. So, no, I appreciate your time, Chris, and learning once again about it.
I'm going to have you back in 5 years, and we're going to talk about the 2,400 sheep on the Fraser and how this is a massive success, and how we're so happy that the best we could do, right? Let's hope at least, right? So, yeah.
Yeah, I hope you're right about that, Kyle. Yeah, I'd love to come back and talk about that.
Yeah, awesome. Well, thanks again, Chris. Appreciate all the work you're doing on the landscape on behalf of wild sheep, and you're certainly a good friend of the Wild Sheep Society BC. And just thank you for all you've done over the years and continue to do. So, have an awesome day, buddy.
Yeah, same to you. Yeah, thanks to you guys and all the supporters, wild sheep too. I mean, without all that support, this stuff likely wouldn't be happening right now. So it's awesome to see.
Fantastic. Awesome.